awaken your spirit. Chosen ones. The human mind spends more time rehearsing what it can't have than appreciating what it does. Most people assume fantasy is loud, obvious, and dramatic. They think obsession announces itself with messages, compliments, or awkward attention. It doesn't. Real fixation is silent, disciplined, and strangely patient. It lives in people who smile normally around you, act indifferent, and then replay your existence like a late-night documentary they never get tired of watching. Here's a fact that should sit heavy for a second. Psychologists have long established that the brain can become emotionally attached to someone without ongoing interaction, simply by repeated mental rehearsal. In other words, a person can feel close to you without ever being close to you. The brain doesn't need permission from reality to form attachment. It just needs repetition. And once repetition starts, stopping it becomes harder than starting it. That's where things get uncomfortable and oddly fascinating, because the people who fantasize about you non-stop aren't necessarily attracted in the way movies portray it. Some aren't even trying to be. Their mind just keeps circling back to you like a song they didn't choose but can't skip. You become a reference point, a mental anchor, a what-if that refuses to dissolve, not because you did something dramatic, but because you didn't. You moved on without explanation. You didn't perform, you didn't over-explain, you didn't linger. And that quiet absence gave their imagination unlimited creative control. Now they replay moments you forgot, analyze pauses that meant nothing to you, and construct entire narratives where you symbolize confidence, closure, validation, or peace they haven't figured out how to give themselves yet. And no, this isn't about ego. If anything, it's about exposure. Because once you realize how many people mentally visit versions of you they never earned access to, your perspective shifts. You stop assuming attention only comes from noise. You start understanding why certain energy feels watched. There's a small bit of humor in all this too, because while you're busy living your life, paying bills, and trying to remember where you left your keys, someone out there is having full-length imaginary conversations with you like it's a Netflix series on season 7. And the wild part, you didn't audition for the role, you just existed. That's what this is really about. Not attraction, not mystery, but the unsettling truth about who thinks about you when the world goes quiet, and why knowing that changes how you move forever. Number 1. It's not the people flirting with you. It's the ones studying you quietly. The people who fantasize about you non-stop are rarely the ones making noise. They're not the obvious admirers, the compliments, or the attention seekers. They're the quiet ones who sit back and watch how you move through spaces. They notice what time you arrive, when you leave, who you talk to, and how little you explain yourself. They pick up on patterns you don't even know you have. That kind of attention isn't accidental, it's deliberate, and it's consuming. While others interact for entertainment or validation, these people interact for information. They replay your tone, your posture, your pauses. They remember what you said once, months ago, and compare it to what you didn't say recently. Not because they're bored, but because they're trying to figure you out. You represent something their mind keeps returning to: control, clarity, strength, or composure they don't feel within themselves. What makes it intense is that they rarely act on it. They don't cross lines. They don't confess. They just observe. And observation without release builds pressure. That pressure turns into fantasy. In their head, they create versions of conversations that never happened, reactions you never gave, and closeness they never earned. The fantasy feels safer than reality because it doesn't risk rejection. You might assume interest fades without engagement. It doesn't. For some people, distance sharpens fixation. The less access they have, the more they fill in gaps with assumptions. They convince themselves they understand you better than they actually do. That false familiarity feeds the obsession even more. What's unsettling is how invisible this all is. You could interact normally, exchange a few words, or simply exist in the same environment, completely unaware that someone is mentally tracking you. Not in a dramatic way, but in a focused, repetitive way that keeps looping. This isn't romance. It isn't admiration in the pure sense. It's fascination mixed with insecurity. You become a quiet reference point in their mind, a standard they measure themselves against, a presence they return to when their own thoughts feel scattered. And the reason it lasts is simple. You never give them enough to finish the story. Number 2. The fantasy isn't about your body. It's about your autonomy. What keeps their mind circling back to you has very little to do with physical attraction. That part fades quickly. Bodies are everywhere. What isn't common is someone who moves through life without seeking permission. You don't wait to be chosen. You don't adjust your behavior to make others comfortable. You decide, act, and keep going. That level of self-direction unsettles people more than they'll ever admit. They fantasize because you don't orbit them. You don't center their opinions, moods, or expectations. That absence creates a strange tension. In their mind, you become the person they could never quite influence. And for someone used to having emotional leverage over others, that lack of control becomes addictive. They replay scenarios where you finally pause, finally notice them, finally need something from them. Not because they want closeness, but because they want relevance. Autonomy exposes insecurity. When someone sees you making choices without approval, it highlights how often they hesitate, overthink, or seek reassurance. Your independence becomes a mirror they didn't ask for. Instead of dealing with that discomfort directly, they escape into fantasy where they feel more confident, more significant, and more necessary to you than reality allows. What feeds this even more is that you don't explain yourself. You don't justify why you left, changed, or grew. You don't soften your decisions with apologies. That silence forces them to sit with uncertainty, and uncertainty is fuel for obsession. The mind hates unanswered questions. It fills the gap by creating stories, meanings, and imagined connections that feel real enough to hold on to. They don't fantasize about possessing you. They fantasize about being able to affect you. There's a big difference. In their imagined world, their words land, their presence matters, and their absence is noticed. That's what gives them comfort. It temporarily erases the truth that, in real life, you are self-contained. The unsettling part is that your autonomy wasn't intentional bait. You weren't trying to attract attention. You were just living according to your own rhythm. But for someone who has spent years adjusting themselves for others, watching you move freely becomes a mental fixation they can't shut off. Number 3. People who feel powerless are the most obsessive. The ones who fantasize about you non-stop aren't always the confident, charismatic types. Often they're people who feel out of control in their own lives. Their jobs, relationships, or personal goals leave them frustrated, anxious, or helpless. When reality doesn't allow them power, influence, or control, their mind searches for an outlet. That's where you come in. You become the person who exists in their mental space as something they can obsess over without ever having to take responsibility or make a move. Their fixation is intense because it fills a void they can't address elsewhere. While you're busy living, growing, and moving forward, they replay your presence in endless loops, seeking a sense of command or emotional satisfaction they can't create in real life. They study your reactions, your routines, even your subtle expressions, because imagining scenarios where you notice, acknowledge, or depend on them makes them feel capable in a way their daily life does not. This obsession thrives on contrast. The more independent, confident, or calm you are, the sharper their sense of inadequacy becomes. Your stability exposes their chaos. That tension, instead of pushing them away, pulls them in, because the mind seeks patterns it can try to control, even if that control is only imaginary. They start constructing endless what-ifs, where the imbalance flips, and they finally hold significance in your world. And it's relentless, because their mind is essentially rehearsing power they can't grasp elsewhere. Every imagined interaction, every hypothetical exchange, every replay of a moment you barely registered strengthens the mental habit. It doesn't need your consent, your attention, or your acknowledgement. It feeds off absence and uncertainty, growing stronger when you move on, stay silent, or refuse to perform. This type of obsession is exhausting to witness from the inside because it's invisible. You may never notice it, yet it dictates their thoughts, emotions, and even behavior around you. It's not admiration or desire in its purest form. It's a coping mechanism for people who feel powerless in their own existence. You become a quiet stage where they rehearse influence, authority, and attention they can't achieve anywhere else, and that is why some minds cannot let go. Number 4. Some of them don't want you. They want to be you. The obsession some people have with you isn't rooted in attraction at all. It's rooted in envy and aspiration. They aren't dreaming about being with you. They're dreaming about being you. Your confidence, your composure, the way you navigate life without asking for permission, your ability to make decisions and move forward while others hesitate. These things create a blueprint they wish they could inhabit. That makes the fixation dangerous in its intensity because it's not satisfied with interaction. It wants transformation. They replay your actions, your reactions, and even your habits in their mind, analyzing what makes you you, as if they could extract your essence and apply it to themselves. Every success you have, every boundary you hold, every moment you handle life gracefully becomes an object of obsession. They are less interested in your presence and more obsessed with your framework, the way you exist, the choices you make, and the independence you exude. Your life becomes a standard they can't measure up to in reality, so they create an endless fantasy around it. The unsettling truth is that this kind of mental fixation can feel closer than physical attention. They think about your daily rhythms, your mindset, your emotional control. They wish to experience your clarity and confidence, and in their minds, they rewrite scenarios where they finally operate at your level. That fantasy fills gaps in their identity, gives them temporary relief from inadequacy, and strengthens over time because reality refuses to give them what they seek. You're not being chased because you're desirable, in the usual sense. You're being observed because your existence exposes gaps in their own self-awareness. They obsess over what they lack, and you, consciously or not, have become a reference point for what they want to internalize but cannot. Their fixation is relentless because the fantasy is a shortcut to identity that effort and introspection can't deliver fast enough. In the end, this obsession isn't about connection, approval, or intimacy. It's about possession of a version of you they can never naturally achieve. And while they replay it endlessly, you continue living unbothered, unaware that someone out there spends hours trying to replicate the very essence of who you are. Number 5. Your refusal to overshare makes you dangerously magnetic. The reason some people can't stop thinking about you is simple. You don't hand them the story on a silver platter. You don't explain your every thought, justify every action, or narrate every feeling. That silence, that refusal to overshare, isn't emptiness, it's power. It creates a mental space they can't control, a puzzle they can't solve, and that is what keeps them hooked. When someone tries to fill the gaps in your life, their imagination goes into overdrive, constructing scenarios and conversations that feel almost real. Every omission becomes an opportunity, every unspoken word a hook they can't release. The more you maintain your inner boundaries, the more they fixate. They start replaying interactions, examining your expressions, and analyzing moments that would barely register to anyone else. Your presence becomes a constant loop in their mind because they're trying to decode you, and decoding you is impossible. They only have fragments. That fragmentary access turns you into an enigma, and enigmas are addictive. The human brain doesn't like uncertainty, yet it craves it when the mystery is compelling enough, and your restraint feeds that craving perfectly. What makes it even more intense is that you're not performing. You're not manipulating their attention or engineering curiosity. You're simply moving through life with discretion, without bending to expectations or explaining your every move. That normal, composed way of existing exposes how little control they actually have, and the mind hates losing control. Instead of letting go, it doubles down, looping through every memory, every glance, every interaction where you held your own. This is why people obsess over you without ever engaging fully. You're not loud, flashy, or dramatic, but your self-containment forces them to fill in the blanks themselves, creating a fantasy world where they feel closer, more influential, or more understood than reality would allow. That mental loop becomes their private playground, and the irony is that the more you maintain your silence and boundaries, the stronger the pull becomes. You didn't try to captivate them, they did it all to themselves, and that makes the fixation relentless and unshakable. Number 6. They replay moments you forgot ever happened. The people who obsess over you aren't focused on big gestures or dramatic interactions. They're focused on the small, almost invisible details that you never considered meaningful. A look you gave, a pause in conversation, a fleeting smile or a shrug that passed unnoticed becomes a mental highlight reel in their minds. These tiny fragments stick because they offer endless interpretation, and their imagination can turn a single gesture into an entire narrative. What you shrugged off as nothing, they analyze, dissect, and replay until it occupies more of their mental energy than their own responsibilities. The intensity comes from how personal it feels to them. They aren't just thinking about you, they're thinking about you in context, how you move, how you react, and how your presence makes them feel. Every subtle glance or casual comment is stored as evidence they can revisit, tweak, and elaborate on. They invent scenarios where these fleeting moments mean more than they actually did. A look that was neutral to you becomes admiration, intrigue, or a challenge in their imagination. Their mind turns reality into a rehearsal room where they control the outcomes that never existed. And it's relentless because it's repetitive. These moments, small as they are, become anchors for the mind to return to again and again. Unlike ordinary thoughts about people, which fade or get replaced, these micro moments linger. They are easy to replay and difficult to resolve because you didn't confirm or deny their interpretations. Your neutrality and independence give them nothing to latch onto except their own invented stories. The more ambiguous your actions, the stronger the loop becomes. This is why obsession feels effortless on their side. They don't have to reach out, perform, or risk rejection. The real world doesn't cooperate, but their mind fills in the gaps, overanalyzing, revisiting, and rewriting. What you forgot or never cared about becomes the epicenter of their mental energy. And because they can't stop revisiting it, every ordinary interaction you've had gains weight, significance, and permanence in their world, long after you've moved on or even forgotten it existed. Number 7. The fixation intensifies when you move on without closure. When you leave a situation, a person, or a chapter of life without explanations, without dramatics, without justifying yourself, something powerful happens. For those who obsess over you, your absence becomes a vacuum that their mind can't resist filling. They start replaying every interaction, every word, every glance, trying to extract meaning, significance, or mistakes. The fact that you moved on quietly, without giving them a performance to latch onto, makes your presence in their mind even more compelling. Silence isn't neutral to them, it's fuel. Closure is an illusion when it comes to obsessive thought. The more you clarify, explain, or perform for someone, the less space there is for them to create endless what-if scenarios. When you don't provide that, your mind becomes theirs to manipulate. Every unanswered question, every gap in understanding, every situation where they didn't get a reaction from you becomes an opportunity for their imagination to spiral. They aren't just missing you, they're missing control, certainty, and the narrative they thought they could own. This is why obsession grows over time instead of fading. Your growth, your independence, and your movement through life without them are not neutral. They highlight their own stagnation. They compare their current self to the person they imagined you were, and because they can't reconcile the distance, their thoughts loop endlessly. In their mind, they rewrite the past, alter your reactions, and construct scenarios where they finally earn your attention or acknowledgement. The fantasy intensifies because reality refused to accommodate their desires. Your choice to move on without closure doesn't just preserve your dignity, it amplifies the impact you have on people who were never ready to hold space for you in reality. That invisible pull is relentless because it isn't about you doing anything dramatic. It's about them never being able to stop thinking about the possibilities you left unresolved. Your absence becomes an unsolvable puzzle, and the more they obsess, the more permanent you become in their mental world. It's proof that leaving quietly can have more influence than trying to explain, justify, or perform. Number 8. Some fantasies are rooted in competition, not desire. Not every person who can't stop thinking about you is obsessed because they want you in the traditional sense. Often, the fixation comes from a place of rivalry. They see your life, your achievements, or your composure as benchmarks they haven't reached, and their mind refuses to accept that disparity. In their imagination, they rewrite scenarios where they finally surpass you, finally earn recognition, or finally get the validation they crave from someone they consider a standard. Their mental energy isn't devoted to affection, it's devoted to measuring themselves against you over and over again. This competitive obsession is relentless because it thrives on comparison. Every small success of yours becomes a spark for their mental rehearsal. They analyze how you handle stress, relationships, or opportunities, and then run through imagined scenarios where they outperform you, dominate a situation, or finally force you to notice them. It doesn't matter that in reality you may be unaware of their existence or indifferent to their efforts. In their fantasy, the imbalance is corrected, and the mental victory feels real enough to sustain them. What makes it more intense is that the obsession often goes unnoticed by you. They're not overt in their admiration, and they don't announce their fixation. Instead, it simmers silently, a loop that reinforces their sense of inadequacy while keeping them tethered to you. Your very presence, your success, your ability to maintain composure and independence becomes the fuel they can't release. The irony is sharp. Your normal life, your boundaries, and your forward motion, all things that should exist independently of them, are the triggers for this mental loop. Their fantasies are a way to regain a sense of control and significance they can't achieve in reality. You become less of a person and more of a measuring stick, an invisible standard they obsess over, always recalculating, always revising, never satisfied. In this type of fixation, it's not about love, attraction, or connection. It's about rivalry, self-validation, and an endless, exhausting rehearsal of catching up to someone they can't reach. Number 9. Your emotional self-control makes others project onto you. One of the most magnetic things about you isn't how loud you are or how flashy your life appears. It's how composed you are. You don't overreact, you don't dramatize, and you don't bend to others' expectations just to keep the peace. That steadiness is rare, and for some people, it's confusing. When they see someone who doesn't wobble under pressure or chase validation, their mind starts filling in the blanks. They assign meaning to your calm, projecting thoughts, feelings, and intentions onto you that may not even exist. That's how fantasies begin. They aren't about what you are, but about what others need you to be. Your refusal to mirror their emotional turbulence highlights their own instability. When someone is emotionally reactive, they subconsciously hope that others will be too, because it validates their intensity. You, however, refuse to play that game. You respond, you adapt, and you act without excess, and suddenly their assumptions about connection and influence no longer hold. In your quiet control, they see what they lack, and rather than confronting their insecurities, they retreat into mental loops where they imagine scenarios in which you notice them, care about them, or finally need them. The projection grows because it's easier to imagine a version of you than to accept reality. Every unspoken reaction you hold, every pause you take, becomes a canvas for their interpretations. They convince themselves that your neutrality carries hidden messages, and their mind starts building stories that revolve around attention, admiration, or approval that you never promised. The calm that is natural to you becomes a magnet for obsession, because it forces them to create significance where none was given. This fixation is relentless because it's self-sustaining. You don't have to perform, explain, or even be aware of it. Their projections continue to grow, looping through imagined interactions and assigning you emotions, desires, and intentions you may never feel. Your emotional self-control isn't just a shield, it's an accelerant. It forces them to occupy mental space in ways that keep them thinking about you non-stop, unable to reconcile your quiet strength with their own chaotic inner world. Number 10. The obsession grows when they realize you're unreachable. The people who think about you non-stop often fixate hardest when they understand deep down that they can't have you. You aren't dramatic, manipulative, or intentionally distant, but your independence and boundaries create a reality they can't control. That inaccessibility becomes the spark that fuels their mind. When someone realizes they can't influence your choices, command your attention, or predict your reactions, the human brain reacts in a strange, relentless way. It loops. The very thing you do naturally, by being yourself, becomes a mental puzzle they can't stop solving. What makes this fixation intense is that it isn't grounded in your actions. It's grounded in their inability to own the narrative. Your life, your decisions, your priorities, none of it conforms to their imagined version of reality, and that friction drives them to replay interactions, construct scenarios, and mentally negotiate outcomes that will never exist. They run through conversations they wish had happened, rewrite moments to make themselves significant, and imagine responses from you that validate their sense of importance. Your unreachability transforms ordinary interactions into high-stakes mental rehearsals. The obsessive loop is strengthened by contrast. The more present you are in your own life, moving forward and evolving without notice or permission, the sharper their sense of exclusion becomes. Your success, calm, and progress emphasize what they lack, and instead of confronting it, they retreat into fantasy. In that mental space, they finally feel influence, control, and proximity to someone who, in reality, remains untouchable. This fixation persists because it's entirely self-contained. You don't have to engage or perform to keep them trapped in their thoughts. Your boundaries, your quiet life, and your autonomy are sufficient to make them loop endlessly. They aren't obsessed with you in the traditional sense. They're obsessed with access they'll never have, attention they can't earn, and outcomes that will never happen. Your inaccessibility, the simple fact that you exist on your own terms, is what keeps them thinking about you day and night, replaying the same patterns in a relentless mental loop that has no release. Number 11. Some people are addicted to imagining versions of you they can control. The obsession isn't always about reality. Often it's about control. Control they can't have in their real lives, so they create it mentally. In their mind you are responsive, attentive, impressed, or dependent in ways that the real world would never allow. They rehearse conversations where you need them, scenarios where your attention is fully theirs, or moments where your approval validates them. These imagined versions of you are perfectly malleable, perfectly predictable, and completely under their influence. That illusion becomes addictive because it gives them a sense of power and closeness they can't earn in reality. What makes it so relentless is that these mental rehearsals feel emotionally real. They laugh at your jokes, hear your compliments, and experience your gratitude in ways that never happened but feel tangible to them. The mind doesn't distinguish between actual and imagined emotional engagement when the loop is strong enough. That's why they can spend hours, days, even months replaying you in ways you would never recognize. They're not just thinking about you. They're constructing a version of you that serves their psychological needs. This obsession also thrives on contrast. In reality, you are independent, unbothered, and free. You make decisions for yourself, live your life on your terms, and refuse to perform for validation. That independence highlights their own lack of control and their inability to influence outcomes. Rather than face that, they escape into the mental version of you they can manage. Every boundary you set, every moment of composure, only strengthens the fantasy because it's an obstacle they can't overcome in reality, but one they can manipulate in their mind. The dangerous beauty of this kind of fixation is how invisible it is. You may never notice a thing. You're living, existing normally, while someone is running an entire alternate version of you in their head, perfectly controlled, endlessly replayed, and impossible to reach. They aren't obsessed with who you actually are. They're addicted to the version of you they think they can possess, and that illusion keeps them trapped in a loop that never ends. Number 12. Your calm presence triggers unresolved wounds. There's a quiet power in the way you exist. You don't need to be dramatic or flashy. You don't chase attention or validation. You move through life with steady composure, making decisions without hesitation, facing challenges without panic, and handling conflict without unnecessary noise. For some people, that calm presence is disorienting. It exposes wounds they haven't dealt with, insecurities they've buried, and the parts of themselves they refuse to face. Instead of confronting their own shortcomings, they latch onto you mentally, replaying interactions, analyzing your behavior, and creating fantasies to fill the gap between your stability and their chaos. Your steadiness becomes a mirror they cannot avoid. Every time they watch you handle life with composure, it highlights their own instability, hesitation, and self-doubt. Their obsession isn't about you personally. It's about what you represent, control, clarity, and a sense of self they can't achieve. Their mind begins looping over every interaction, every glance, every word, trying to reconcile the reality of your confidence with their own fractured perception of themselves. You didn't ask to trigger them, but your presence is enough to shine a light on their internal imbalance, and their reaction is mental fixation. The more calm and composed you are, the more intense their thoughts become. Every small boundary you hold, every quiet refusal to perform or explain yourself, becomes fuel for their imagination. They mentally rehearse scenarios where your calmness bends to their will, where your attention validates them, or where your acknowledgement finally repairs the parts of themselves they've ignored. That mental rehearsal is endless, because in reality, none of it exists. They're simply trying to fix what they feel is broken within themselves, using you as the reference point. And here's the irony. Your calm isn't a weapon, and you're not trying to provoke anything. You're simply living fully in your own center, steady and composed. Yet for those with unresolved wounds, that ordinary presence becomes extraordinary in its effect. It keeps them trapped in loops of obsession, replaying your stability and composure over and over, trying to understand what they cannot become and cannot have, making your existence an unshakable anchor in their chaotic mental world. Number 13. They fantasize because reality exposed their limitations. One of the harshest truths about obsession is that it often grows not from admiration, but from inadequacy. When someone comes into contact with you, they see aspects of life they're not ready to handle. They notice your confidence, your decisiveness, your ability to navigate challenges without panic, and suddenly they realize how much they fall short. That realization is uncomfortable, too uncomfortable for some to confront directly. Instead of improving, learning, or stepping up, their mind retreats into fantasy, creating a version of you and a version of themselves where the imbalance disappears. In that imagined world, they are competent, influential, and significant. The fixation persists because it fills a void reality refuses to satisfy. Every interaction, every fleeting moment is replayed and dissected endlessly. Your words, gestures, and even your silence become raw material for a mental construct where they can feel control, power, or closeness that never exists outside their imagination. You didn't fail them, they failed themselves. And their fantasy is a way of coping with that failure, a mental rehearsal for scenarios they can't live in real life. What makes this obsession particularly consuming is that it thrives on contrast. Your life moves forward. You make decisions, set boundaries, and evolve. Meanwhile, they are stuck replaying you in their mind, imagining outcomes, rewriting past interactions, and constructing scenarios where they finally measure up. Every success of yours, every instance of composure, and every boundary you hold highlights what they cannot do, reinforcing the loop of fixation. The deeper truth is that their obsession says more about them than it does about you. You are not the cause, you are the mirror. The more capable, independent, and composed you are, the more they confront the limits of their own reality. Unable to reconcile the gap, they escape into fantasies where they finally overcome it. That's why, in many cases, people think about you more than you could ever imagine, not because of what you did, but because your existence exposed the harsh, uncomfortable truth about what they haven't yet achieved. Their obsession is a silent acknowledgement of their own limitations, endlessly replayed in a world where they can temporarily feel competent. Number 14. The most unsettling truth. Some people think about you more than they think about themselves. There's a type of fixation that goes beyond attraction, rivalry, or admiration. It's not casual, it's not occasional, and it's not harmless. Some people spend so much time replaying your presence, dissecting your actions, and constructing versions of your life in their mind that they think about you more than they ever think about their own goals, their own future, or even their own happiness. Your existence, even if completely neutral or distant, becomes the center of their mental universe. That level of obsession is quiet, invisible, and yet more consuming than anything they could project outwardly. This happens because they've transferred the energy they should be investing in themselves onto you. Every decision you make, every boundary you hold, every step you take forward is processed, dissected, and rehearsed in their mind. They imagine your responses, analyze your reactions, and mentally script interactions that never existed. It's a loop that occupies hours, days, and weeks, leaving little room for reflection, self-improvement, or real-world progress. You didn't ask for this attention, and yet your mere autonomy and normal existence are enough to make someone mentally abandon their own priorities in favor of obsessing over you. What makes it unsettling is how intimate and personal it feels to them. You are not just a thought. They become emotionally invested in versions of you that only exist in their imagination. They assign feelings, intentions, and narratives to you, and in doing so, they create a sense of connection that is entirely one-sided. The fixation becomes a constant background noise in their mind, a reference point for every decision, emotion, and desire they fail to direct at themselves. The intensity of this kind of mental occupation is a reflection of your impact, whether or not you intended it. Your presence exposes how little control, focus, or direction they have in their own life. And because your life continues forward without their input or influence, their mind doubles down, replaying every possible interaction endlessly. Some people literally live more in their fantasies of you than in their own lives, and that silent obsession, growing unchecked, is a testament to the quiet power and magnetism of simply existing on your own terms. The reality is this: people think about you far more than you realize, and often for reasons that have little to do with attraction, approval, or even conscious desire. Their minds latch onto you because you represent what they lack, what they want, or what they are not ready to confront within themselves. Your independence, your composure, your calm presence, your boundaries, and even the small, fleeting details of your life become magnets for mental obsession. It's not always flattering, and it's not always intentional, but it is undeniable. From the quiet observers who study you in silence, to those who replay moments you forgot ever happened, to the ones who fantasize because they feel powerless or are addicted to versions of you they can control, every layer of this fixation reveals the truth. Your existence exposes gaps in their reality. You've moved forward, lived your life, made decisions, and held your center. And in doing so, you've become a mirror for insecurities, envy, and longing that some people aren't ready to face. That's why your life, your choices, and even your absence create a mental loop that keeps others thinking about you non-stop. They aren't always aware of it, and you may never notice it, but it's happening. And here's the ultimate takeaway. Your power doesn't come from attention, manipulation, or performance. It comes from simply being yourself, living with autonomy, setting boundaries, and holding your own emotional space. People will obsess, speculate, and fantasize, but that fixation exists in their minds, not in your reality. You are not responsible for it, nor are you obligated to respond. Your calm, your independence, and your life on your own terms are enough to inspire, unsettle, and captivate more deeply than any effort to impress could ever achieve. So remember, the fascination people have with you isn't a reflection of their admiration. It's a reflection of their limitations. And as long as you continue living with integrity, focus, and self-possession, their mental loops will only remind you of the quiet influence you hold over the world. If this opened your eyes, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more insights like this. Like the video if it resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and drop a comment below to tell us what struck you the most. Your engagement helps us create even deeper, more revealing content that cuts straight to the truth. Stay awakened, chosen ones.